Hey, super friends, my name is Neil, and welcome to this episode 87 of the Get Your Comic Con podcast. We're here fortnightly-ish to bring you a slice of film, TV, and pop culture goodness from our studio direct to your speakers. I'm flying solo this week as I am doing a special deep dive on Warner Brothers Pictures and DC Comics' Shazam! Fury of the Gods, which hit cinemas across the globe on March the 17th, 2023. I have seen this film twice so far, and the review embargo has now lifted, which means that I can give you my thoughts, and I can also share with you a very special interview that I got to do a couple of weeks ago with the director of both Shazam and Shazam Fury of the Gods, David F. Sandberg. Martin hasn't had a chance to see this film yet. We're taking him on Friday once it hits cinemas, so you'll have to wait and hear his thoughts a little bit later on, but I can tell you what I thought of this film. And I can tell you that I really enjoyed it. I said in my social media reaction that it's absolutely full of all of the heart that was in the first Shazam film. Everything that was there is completely intact, but presented in this much grander scale, this huger story with the Daughters of Atlas, played by Helen Mirren, Lucy Liu, and Rachel Ziegler. The stakes are higher, the monsters are bigger and cooler. It's all just so much fun. It's great, and I think if you enjoyed the first film, then you are really going to enjoy what they've done with this second one. But let's cover off the main bits first. So, the synopsis for Shazam, Fury of the Gods. Bestowed with the powers of the gods, Billy Batson and his fellow foster kids are still learning how to juggle teenage life with having adult superhero alter egos. But when the Daughters of Atlas, a vengeful trio of ancient gods, arrive on Earth in search of the magic stolen from them long ago, Billy, aka Shazam, and his family are thrust into a battle for their superpowers, their lives, and the fate of their world. Shazam Fury of the Gods stars returning cast members Zachary Levi as Shazam, Asher Angel as Billy Batson, Jack Dylan Grazer as Freddie Freeman, Adam Brody as Superhero Freddie, Ross Butler as Superhero Eugene, Megan Good as Superhero Darla, DJ Catrona as Superhero Pedro, Grace Caroline Curry as Mary Broomfield and Superhero Mary this time around, Faith Herman as Darla Dudley, Ian Chen as Eugene Choi, Jovan Armand as Pedro Penna, Marta Milans as Rosa Vasquez, and Cooper Andrews as Victor Vasquez. You've also got Damon Hunsu, who returns as the Wizard. Joining the cast this time around are the trio of villains, as I just said, Rachel Ziegler, Lucy Liu, and Helen Mirren. The film is directed by David Sandberg and produced by Peter Safran, and it's written by Henry Gayden and Chris Morgan. I have had such an amazing experience thanks to Warner Brothers in getting close to this film. I was going to say working on this film, but that sounds like I actually helped make it, which I obviously did not. But in terms of DC properties, you know, I got to see this a couple of weeks ago at Warner Brothers head office ahead of doing the interview with David. I then got to go to the premiere and walk the red carpet alongside Helen Mirren and the rest of the cast, which was so cool to see them all in person. And it's just been really sweet to get this close to a film which features characters that I've grown up reading in the pages of DC Comics. So why, in fact, before we get down to talking about the film, why don't I hand you over to my interview with David F. Sandberg, and you can hear the two of us talk about how he raised the stakes, what he did this time around. He is such a, if you've seen any of his horror movies that he's worked on, he's such a practical filmmaker that I really wanted to just get down to the practicalities of filmmaking on a scale like this film. You know, there are so many practical effects. I mean, that was a real wooden dragon that you saw in the trailer, obviously. But, I mean, what I'm trying to say is if you look at some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, they had practical versions of certain things on set for referencing. There were ways that they got this film to feel as real as it does, given the scale and the scope of what's going on. And that was really what I wanted to talk to him about. So let's hand over to me, that sounds weird, and David to hear our chat.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm looking at your action figures back there. Is that Shazam up there?
We've got the whole DC family is lurking behind me here.
Nice.
Was being climbed on by a cat just a second ago, so we've removed him from the room for the time being.
Oh, I wanted to see that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it. I really appreciated that all of the heart of the first film is completely intact, but in this grander story that we're seeing this time around.
Well,
After the success of the first film, was going bigger something that you wanted to do to be able to show what these characters were capable of?
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. But yeah, I mean, that felt like the natural thing to do because, like, at the end of the first one, the whole family gets superpowers. So it's like, well, now they all have powers, and you kind of have to go bigger. It's a sequel, so it's like, yeah, you have to up it a bit. But well, that's what was exciting to me to see more of the family and get to do a bunch of bigger action stuff and more monsters and gods and all of it. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that you think we kept some of that charm from the first one because that's a trick, especially with a sequel where it's yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know exactly what you mean. There is that tendency sometimes with sequels to go so big that maybe some of the heart gets lost in it. But that absolutely was not kind of what I felt from this film. But you just touched on something there, just in terms of the scale of the action sequences. I saw that brilliant outtake with Grace's cape that malfunctioned during a wire stunt, and it got me thinking, as a director, for you, when you see that final sort of shooting script, how on earth do you try and think, okay, this is what we're going to do practically? This, I mean, obviously there's a giant dragon. That's not something you're doing practically.
right.
But how do you go about kind of deciding what's practical and what to do in post production?
It takes a little bit. It's a long conversation with people who know more than me. No, but I did at first go like, well, some of these creatures like the Cyclops and the Minotaur, they are pretty humanoid. So it's like, can we do them practically? Um, but and we did sort of talk to practical effects companies and sort of started going down that route. But then it turned into this thing of like, well, we're going to have to make CG versions of them anyway because we need so many of them and we need them to do things that guys in a suit just can't do. And then it's like, well, if we're making them anyway, let's then if we go the full CGI route, then we can design them any way we want. Like we don't have to like fit a guy's legs into the
Yeah.
Minotaur's legs and things like that. And just it made more sense, And Peter Safran, who produced Aquaman and a bunch of other DC movies, he was also telling me about like, well, on Aquaman with the trench creatures, they did them practically, and then it's like it didn't look good. So then you have to replace it anyway, and then that's wasted money. So it's like, well, let's not waste money. Let's put everything up on the screen.
And I saw, so you kind of touched on it again there as well, that there were practical versions of the heads of some of those creatures on set. And
Yeah.
firstly, I mean, those designs, even when they're CGI, look like they're taken straight from a 1960s stop motion adventure, which I just loved. They look
Yes.
so great on screen. But does it, to have that kind of physical prop there, even just for lighting and for actors to kind of get their line of sight, when you're doing those big crowd scenes where you're trying to get the sense of, we were in real danger here. Does
Yeah.
that help you to kind of get the authenticity when there is something physical for the actors to look at?
Yeah. I mean, in the big crowd scenes, you don't really show that to the crowds. We fired guns in the air like blanks to get people to run and be scared of the dragon, like bang, bang, run. No, but I mean, you do whatever you can to keep some physicality in there. Like we did have for these creatures, we did have performers on set, like really tall guys in gray suits, so they can like uh, slap things and like pick people up and things like that. And so actors actually have something to work against, but it does look a little silly on set with just big guys in gray going around. But it helps a lot to have something there. So it's not just like, oh, imagine there's a bunch of monsters here.
And did I spy a little director cameo, maybe being carried away by one of those monsters at one point, possibly?
Yes. Yeah, this is my first. I've done cameos before with my voice, or like I was a
Yeah.
creature performer in the first movie, like Crocodile. But this is the first time you actually see my face in a film. But that was really fun to get to do that stunt, getting
Yeah,
hoisted up
yeah.
in the air on wires and things. And it makes you appreciate what the actors go through because you do get pretty bruised by those things.
Well, that's it for my time. Thank you so much for chatting with me about the film. I will hopefully see you later at the screening down in Leicester Square because I'm heading down
Oh,
there.
nice.
So
Yeah.
enjoy, best of luck with the movie, and thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much again to Warner Brothers for setting that up. He was lovely to speak to, and I actually managed to bump into him as he was leaving the cinema after the premiere that night. So I know it was such a huge crowd and people were trying to get his attention, but I so appreciate the fact that he took a couple of seconds to just chat with me. And, I kind of said to him, I'd spoken to him earlier in the day and just thanked him again for the movie. And it was so lovely to just have that moment. And also to see, how much he was able to enjoy the fact that the audience at the premiere enjoyed the film was lovely, absolutely lovely. Which leads me on to my thoughts on this film. So before I start on this, just to say this is spoiler free. Obviously, the film, as I'm recording this, is not out yet, so I do not want to spoil it for anybody who is going out to see it this weekend or next week. So you are safe from spoilers right now. It's inevitable with a superhero sequel that you're going to go bigger. When you've been successful at the box office, like the first Shazam film was, it's just an inevitability that you're going to have more money the second time round, which means you're going to have bigger ambitions, probably a bigger cast. You've got bigger goals, and often we look at superhero sequels and say, do you know what, maybe they went too big, or they reached for something that they just didn't quite manage to grasp. And I'm so happy to say that that isn't the case with Fury of the Gods. It does go bigger. It is so much bigger in terms of scale than the first film. The Daughters of Atlas represent this much bigger threat to the Shazam family, however you want to call it, and the methods that they go through to enact their plan, and the monsters that brings forth, some of which you've glimpsed in the trailer, like the ginormous wooden dragon, are obviously bigger in size physically than the 7 deadly sins were in the previous film, but they also represent a bigger threat. The previous film very much focused on Billy's attempt to find his mum and find his place within a family, to find a family in some respect. And by the end of the film, we had seen him find that, albeit reluctantly, with this foster mother in Rosa and Victor as his foster father, and then Pedro, Eugene, Darla, Freddie, Mary as his foster siblings. And because he shared his powers with them at the end of the first film to defeat Dr. Savannah, Mark Strong's character, where we pick up now is very much the next step of that, which is Billy coming to terms with being the leader of this superhero group. Tiny minor spoiler, which I think might be in the trailer, to be fair, who are referred to as the Philadelphia Fiascos by the local news. But he very much has a different journey this time, which is that he's found family. He's grabbed onto that now that he's realized that these are his people, and this is almost in some respect about letting them go seems like the wrong word, but in many respects it is about that, not holding on so tightly that he ends up alienating those around him for that particular reason. And so the film opens with this wonderful scene, which is actually where one of the stories in the Shazam Matters comic book ends. So Shazam Matters was a comic book which came out a couple of weeks ago, an anthology book with stories on each of the characters written by some of the actors from the film. And in particular, there is a story that ends with Shazam, rather than Billy Batson, visiting a paediatrician for a psychology session, which leads to a very humorous scene at the beginning of this film. It ties the two together very nicely, but also really drives home the fact that Billy has some kind of imposter syndrome in terms of how he is perceived by the wider world as a superhero. He feels very inferior to Aquaman, to Batman, to Flash, to all these other Justice Leaguers. And it's just written so wonderfully in the script in terms of how emotional it is and how that becomes a through line for the entire film. And piled on top of that then is the younger Billy and his fear about the fact that he's going to be turning 18 soon and that he will age out of the foster system, and does that mean he needs to leave this family behind? And that really does pick up pace throughout the film as well, and brings you to a point where you reach where he is at the conclusion of the film, which is definitely an incredibly emotional conclusion in many respects, more so than in the first film. But of course, we have a long way to go to get there, and that includes the Daughters of Atlas. And so quickly we pick up with their story. It's very much tied to what's in the first film. Everything really does follow on from what Sandberg and Gaiden did in the first film. They are after the staff that we saw Billy break after sharing his powers with the rest of the family. There is a callback to that moment in the film just to show them off, to remind you, or in case for some reason you hadn't seen the first film. And so they are after it in order to regain their powers, and there is a wonderful story baked in with them, which is part of the more magical, mystical side of the DC universe, but also calls back to Atlas being one of the Greek gods that has connections to other characters within the DCU, and you can feel those connections to the wider DC universe. So it's not like, I'm not saying we're going to Themyscira and you're going to go and meet Greek gods, but there are passing mentions to characters like Ares, and you can feel that mythology that has underpinned a couple of the other films exists here, and it's shared. And so there's a familiarity to it, which I think really helps to make at least the version of the DC universe that exists in film right now, prior to all of the changes that we know are coming, it makes it feel more welcome, and it's more organic, and it doesn't feel forced in any way, shape or form. There are a couple of plot points in the film which I do feel are a little bit undercooked, and I don't know if that's due to things being taken out in terms of the timing for the edit, or if that is something which maybe there just wasn't time for in the script. But there's a particular plot point that is brought up towards the beginning of the film between Billy and Rosa, which circles back at a moment later in the film, which has actually been quite widely seen in a lot of clips and trailers, that are two really great emotional touch points between foster mother and foster son. But the film lacked a little bit of connective tissue between those two moments for me that would have made it have more of an emotional impact than it does. It's so well acted by Asher Angel, again, at both ends of the spectrum, that actually it lands well despite what feels like it's missing in the middle. And that is also down to Marta Williams as well, who I think is absolutely wonderful as Rosa, and I really wanted more of her in this film. But there are moments like that. There are I guess I want to say the usual kind of plot contrivances that you would expect from a superhero film, because you're trying to maintain that level of pacing and that level of action and excitement. There are naturally things that you just don't have time for, or that you hope the audience will be able to suspend their disbelief over. And none of those moments that occurred in this film really stuck with me all that much. They're not detractors which are so big that they're going to ruin your experience, but they do exist there. But I appreciate the fact that this film is running at 2 hours and 10 minutes, so it's not a 90-minute breeze. It's likewise not a 3-hour The Batman. It's trying to land somewhere between the two, and I think overall it manages to do that pretty well. As you might be able to tell at this point, I didn't sort of structure this in my head. This is literally a stream of consciousness. Just still touching on the Daughters of Atlas, I think it's worth noting that as villains, they do have obviously motivation, as I just talked about, in terms of wanting to get their powers back, but they do have individual personalities, individual motivations. There is conflict between them as well as between them and the Shazam family. There is interpersonal conflict between the three sisters. And a wonderful joke about the fact that they look so different in terms of age. How could they be sisters? Just in terms of logistically in the film, it felt to me like their motivations were organic to the story, and that they were also well fleshed out enough that not only did they feel threatening, but it all made sense to me. I could follow it. It wasn't a contrivance. It worked for me really, really well throughout the entire film. The family aspect with the Shazamily is also really, really fun to watch. So there's a scene which you've glimpsed in the trailers where they're on a bridge and you see them all flying in and landing together in the kind of superhero line. And it is one of those classic superhero moments which really does amp you up. And it happens quite early in the film as well. It has a brilliant soundtrack, which I won't spoil. It also has a wonderful cameo from David Sandberg's wife, Lotta Loston. She obviously was in the first film and sadly was turned to a pile of ash when she touched the door that Dr. Savannah was working with, but she's back playing a different character in this one, and she has a great moment within that scene itself. But it's it's a really strong payoff to the idea of them as a superhero team, which is really, really great to see. And it's nice that it comes early in the film because it does give you that foundation to build from for the rest of the story. You know, there are certain things that people may consider spoilers, particularly what you may have seen of Rachel Ziegler's character Anthea in the trailers. But actually, these are all moments that happen very, very early in the film, and it hasn't, although it might feel like it hasn't given away everything that's going to happen throughout the entire of the runtime. And again, there is some interpersonal conflict between the kids. You know, as Billy is struggling and holding on to people, Mary is maybe a little bit resentful because she's still at home. She hasn't gone away to college as we thought that she was going to at the end of the first film. Freddie is Freddie, and Jack Dylan Grazer really does own this film in many ways as well. But he has things that he wants to do as Captain Every Power, as he is known. And so that does challenge Billy's leadership, and there is a lot that you are able to mine from the film in terms of those character moments and those character beats between all of them as teenagers, as heroes, you know, as a foster family against the villains. All of that is there, and it remains completely intact to what you saw in the first film. Likewise, you are going to laugh like you did in the first film. Freddy, again, is a great source of humour. There is a cameo from a voice actor who played Batman in a long-running TV series a few years ago, who is in there, who brings some great levity to a couple of moments with Freddy. And so if you are wanting more of that heart and that fun and that sense of action adventure from the first film, you're absolutely going to get that in spades here. I'm not going to say that much more on the story because I feel like I'm going to stray off into spoiler territory. So just a bit about the production itself. They have new costumes this time around. They're not massively tweaked from the last film, but they have been upgraded a little bit. The lightning bolts are slightly different. They're less bulky, so they're not carrying around the huge battery packs that were in the suits. The suits all look amazing. They look great. Everyone, again, has their own colour, their own sense of self around their powers. They're all very individual. This isn't a carbon copy group of heroes, which I really appreciated seeing. The villain costumes, the sisters, again, they each have an individual look to them. Their individual power sets also make them very, very different. Rachel Ziegler's, you've glimpsed it in the trailers, but it looks excellent the way her powers are executed on screen. And that kind of leads me into the visual effects, which are all, again, great. So the dragon, you know, that's a huge scale thing, and that dragon is flying around Philadelphia, and it is great. The film is budgeted at, I believe, 100 million, and they really have put as much of that on the screen as possible. I really enjoyed, and you heard me talk about it with David in that interview, but I really loved the design of the monsters that you're going to see in this film. I think they look great, and they're executed incredibly well in terms of the visual effects. Yes, there are a couple of moments which really do stretch what the budget is able to do, but nothing which you're going to look at and think it looks off, or it looks wrong, or doesn't look great. The scale and the scope of the film is really well executed in terms of what is in visual effects and what is in practical effects. And the last thing I want to touch on is the score. So the first film was scored by Benjamin Wallfish. This time around it's scored by Christoph Beck, which is a name which should be very familiar to Buffy fans, as he was the composer on seasons 1 to 5 of Buffy before moving on and doing a whole plethora of other things. But similar to the first film, it evokes that sense of action adventure, much like the first film, but on a grander scale. There are some really wonderful themes that are in there, some really wonderful action score moments that are in there, and I haven't had a chance to listen to the soundtrack album on its own yet, but it really beautifully underpins everything that David and the cast are trying to do on screen. It really fits in well. It doesn't overpower the film at all. It just sits perfectly in the mix of everything that's going on in screen. So, I mean, when it comes to sort of wrapping up, I said it at the top of the podcast, but there is so much heart in this film. There is so much humour in this film, but it is so much grander. It's so much bigger. It reaches to do so much more, and I think it really does land incredibly well in trying to do so. And aside from a couple of points which I felt could have used more development, there's very little that I could fault this film on. I think, as I said, if you are a fan of the first film, if you are a fan of this character, then there is a lot to enjoy and a lot to really dig into and get to grips with on multiple viewings, and I look forward to going back and seeing it again. There are 2 scenes in the credits. There is a mid-credit scene which did leave my jaw on the floor, and there is a post-credit scene which is very, very funny. I am not going to say anything else. I do not want to spoil it. There are enough spoilers in promos and trailers that are out there on the internet at the moment. So just go watch this film, love it, and let me know what you think. You can find me on social media. I'm at Neil Varg on Twitter and Instagram, and you can always find us at Get Your Comic On all platforms. Don't forget to check out all the latest news over on our website, which is www.getyourcomiccon.co.uk. And if you'd like to actually watch my chat with David Sandberg rather than just listen to it, you can also check it out over on our YouTube channel. Just search for Get Your Comic On and you'll find us over there. We have lots of video interviews and other fun bits and pieces that you can find. I'm going to be back very, very soon interviewing the cast and creative team behind Batman, The Doom That Came to Gotham, which is a brand new animated movie which is dropping on, I wanted to say the 26th of March on disc and 27th of March on digital. Might be the 27th, 28th, whatever that week is, the Monday, Tuesday. It is an adaptation of the book by Mike Mignola, which came out in 2001. It's a 1920s-esque supernatural demonic tale set in an Elseworlds Batman. So I'm going to be chatting to some of the cast and crew of that film very, very soon, and you'll be hearing those interviews. But until next time, stay safe, stay well, and I will see you very soon. Bye!